for January 17th, 2024. Okay, so the meeting is being recorded. Yeah, so welcome everybody, commissioners, guests, and whoever is AMYG and MIG, if you could identify yourself, that would be great. So we could put it in the minutes as an attendee at this meeting, either in the chat or vocally. So we're going to start by looking at the agenda, reviewing the agenda, and seeing if we need any adjustments made. The agenda basically is going to consist of one thing for the most part, which is working hard to generate a response to the proposal that Buttermilk has offered us. So, okay, so Chris Grant is going away, but he's coming back to see if his audio will work. There, right at the end of the meeting, we're going to just look at the status updates of a few other things that we're working on. Then there are some other things that we're not even going to look at the status updates of. We have lots of things in the cooker, so we would like to make some progress tonight, hopefully, on Buttermilk. Anybody want to change anything on the agenda or do anything to the agenda? Adjust it in any way? Okay, not hearing any suggestions, we'll proceed with the agenda as published, and we'll move on to see if there are any public comments on items that are not on the agenda. Anybody want to make a comment on something not on the agenda? Bradley?
Yes, just actually a quick question. I did notice that the Chittenden County Regional Planning Commission is seeking public input on planning ideas and projects for its annual work program. I think the deadline is January 20th. And I saw in that they are encouraging folks to coordinate their ideas with their municipality, since projects would require local funding and support. And I didn't know if this commission had any guidance in terms of how you would like folks to engage with you if they did have any such ideas. Is there any particular way you'd like people to go about that?
Yeah, I would defer that to Keith.
Yeah, Bradley, hopefully I'm on. I am.
Yes.
You certainly can forward any comments to me. I could forward them out. You could also forward them directly to them. They did provide a link in that. I believe it was embedded in Front Porch Forum. And yeah, they're doing their work plan. And there's also an ecos component to that too, which is pretty interesting. So either way you want to do it is fine with me. I can assure you that I will forward it. Or you can obviously do it by yourself as a citizen of the town of Richmond.
Okay, that sounds great. Yeah, I was curious if there was specifically in terms of coordination with the town or with this commission, if there's any guidance in terms of their suggestion around coordination. Just make folks aware, come to a meeting and say something, or if there's anything else in particular you wanted to give for guidance around that. But
yeah, no, I think that's pretty much it, to be honest with you. I mean, if you have any it's a regional issue or plan and not necessarily focused towards Richmond, but you know, all the machinations are the same.
Okay, great. Thanks, appreciate it.
And, you know, I would think if anyone is going to be coordinating it, it's going to be Keith, because he would receive select board information if they have something they want to do. Planning commission, you know, if we as a planning commission want to propose something, then we would be forwarding it to Keith, and he's on the PAC. He's on one of the committees of the regional planning. So, you know, if there's coordinating that needs to be done, Keith is going to do it, right, Keith?
To the best of my ability, ma'am.
Yes. So, Chris, are you having sound now?
I do. Yeah, no, I think
okay.
I'm in good shape.
Excellent. Okay. Well, thank you, Bradley, for that comment. You know, it's something else that we could be thinking about for sure, along with some other things. So whatever we can get done and get thought about, sent over to Keith, that would be great. All right.
I'm just like, if I can make a quick comment, I am kind of watching what's coming into the waiting room because of our the bombing we had last time. So I might not be totally engaged at this point. So just fair warning,
Okay.
that's all.
Okay. Sounds good. Keep those bombers a little distance. That'd be good.
Hmm.
Sounds
All
like
right.
there was some excitement last time.
Yes, you missed the excitement. Not that we always don't have excitement, but that was like over the top excitement. So,
It was amazing.
At least 2 weeks worth of excitement.
Yeah, I was still talking about it.
okay, so we'll move on to item number 4 on our agenda, which is to review the minutes of our January 3rd, 2024 meeting. Does anyone have any corrections, any additions, anything they would like to add to those minutes at all, or, feel they were mischaracterized somehow? Now would be the time to speak up. Okay, and hopefully those of you who weren't here last time read the minutes so that you have some idea of what happened at our last meeting. And this meeting is a bit of a continuation of that. So, all right, I don't see any hands. I don't hear anyone wanting to make comments. So we're going to accept those minutes as written into the record. All right. And we're going to move on to the question of Buttermilk. So Buttermilk, the developer of the creamery, has come to us with some proposals. They have a permit for a 31-unit building, building number 2. They would like to have some additional units in there and less commercial space, among a few other things that they're interested in. So they've provided a lot of paperwork, and I have suggested to them that we have a good amount of paperwork that we will now look at, and we will formulate our own idea about what we want to do here. A counter proposal, if you like, to start off the business of a negotiation. We want this to be our work. We want to decide what it is that we want for Richmond. They have already put in their ideas, their proposal, what they need, what they wish for. And so I've asked them to kind of stay out a little bit of the process so that we can come to grips with these ideas ourselves. Obviously, to make any kind of proposal, and to sell it to the select board, which is the next step, we're going to have to really dig into these ideas and see what works for us, all things considered. Chris. So you're muted right now.
I have a few comments that I'd like to make with regards to Buttermilk, but I don't want to do it out of turn, So if there was more that you wanted to say, Virginia, please go ahead. And then there were a few things that I wanted to share from my experience of being on the select board when they were initially involved with Jelena Court.
Okay. Well, thank you for letting me talk about that, because what I really want to do is I want to start from now, from what we have on the ground as their project and going forward. I do not want to get into the deep weeds of the history of this. It is not productive to be constantly rehashing what has gone before. We need to see, what do they have as a project? How is it working? Are there any things that are missing in their project? And what do we want from a future phase of this project? So I'm kind of not very interested in hearing historical points being made. We've had quite a lot of historical points being made, and I think it's going to be more productive if we really spend our time digging into what we want going forward. So I would just like to say that. So looking at the memo that I wrote, they have presented us with an opportunity to have some additional housing. And that's basically what they have done that, is going to benefit them. It's going to benefit us, most likely, to have more housing. We talk frequently about housing. We need to walk the walk of housing and really think, where are we going to put this housing? We've talked about diverse housing, and this is presenting an opportunity for an underserved group of renters, the workforce, so-called workforce housing, which is not ultra-low income housing, but it is an underserved group. It's workforce housing. It's small apartments that, by reason of their being fairly small, are relatively inexpensive. So what I would like to do, because this is an opportunity that we need to grapple with, is to look at each aspect of it and see what we're comfortable with each aspect, so that we can make a proposal for a whole plan that we can submit back to Buttermilk saying, we're driving this train. This is what we have decided will work for us. I wanted to just encourage people to think about the housing piece, the increased housing. It's in an area that's already relatively developed. It borders on the downtown. It can be thought of as part of the downtown of our village. More foot traffic, less cars. We have more houses out in the burbs. People are going to drive in. If you have people who live in the village, they're going to walk to the grocery store. So more foot traffic, a more vibrant commercial. Our businesses that we have here already will be better supported, so we'll be able to maintain them. We don't have to give up any green space for this. This is an area that's already slated for development. We would just be making it a little bit more dense. So those are just some reasons. We did receive a list of tenants from Buttermilk in their building number 1 that seem to be just the people that have been talked about all along that we need housing for. The nurses, the teachers, the firefighters, grad students, carpenters, people who don't qualify for low income housing, but they're moderate income housing and they need a place to start. They need a rental that they can start in our village. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to look at the issues kind of one by one and make some kind of a counter proposal. The ball is in our court right now. We want it to be that way until we come to a decision about sending it back to Buttermilk's court. So, Chris.
Okay. A couple things. And my intention is not to rehash the past, Virginia. It's to give a perspective of somebody who's been involved with this for a long time. I think that it's certainly my impression is that the situation that Buttermilk presents with the relative demand for residential and commercial space in Richmond is pretty much what it is. It actually is what it is, what it was a decade ago when this all started, and it's only gotten more extreme because of COVID, because of further development pressures in Chittenden County. And that is that there's not much demand for commercial space, and there is strong demand for residential space. So that's the market. That doesn't mean that that's what we should do. It's just the reality of the situation, and that we can certainly try and push this development in the direction of commercial property, but there are going to be limits to what Buttermilk can or is willing to do. The other thing also is when I was reviewing the minutes from the last meeting, I feel like there's still a tendency to for folks in town, and I'm not pointing fingers or anything, to sort of stumble over the idea of, does Buttermilk have the town's best interests in mind? And that is just not productive thinking. Buttermilk is a business. Their business is developing property. They have a responsibility to, if nobody else, their families, if not, their investors, I don't know what their structure is, in order to make a profit, and that comes first. We certainly hope that they will do things that we approve of. They have already had a long-term relationship with us, and will continue to do that. But I think the idea that we should somehow look to them to do the thing that's in the best interest of the town in the long run, that's just not, that's kind of magical thinking. And at what you said, Virginia, I think is the appropriate way to look at this, is we are in another phase of our ongoing negotiation with Buttermilk about what's going to happen next with the Jelena Court property. And that's entirely appropriate and what it should be at this time. The situation on the ground has changed since they started their work in Richmond, and it's appropriate for us to be revisiting this on a regular basis, and that's what we're doing now. But it's a business negotiation. And then the final thing I wanted to say is that, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't feel like there is a standard understanding, even within the Planning Commission, but certainly not between the Planning Commission and Buttermilk, of what affordable means. And I think what we would probably behoove all of us to come up with something where we're talking about the same thing. Because my understanding is when Buttermilk talks about affordable, they mean units that are receiving no kinds of subsidies or rental cost support from the state or federal government, but that have been designed and sized so that they can be viable from a business perspective when charging a rent that is at some percentage of area median income. Now, that's a good thing. Don't get me wrong. I think that it's good to have, what I would call less expensive market units. And I think that's what we have in Richmond now. But that is not what I call affordable housing. And it doesn't exhaust the entire realm of affordable housing that we could bring to Richmond if we so desired. And I asked a question about this, not at the last meeting, but the meeting before, and tried to really understand what Buttermilk had done in terms of reaching out to affordable housing agencies and nonprofit groups. And the answer I got back was nothing, that they hadn't done that. And, that's fine. That's not their area of expertise. Those tend to be specialized developers, but it's something that we could explore. And I asked Sue Breezy from Jericho a little bit about that, and she's going to send me some of the background research that they've done in this area, but I don't have that to share yet tonight. Anyway, so sorry to ramble on, but I did want to bring those things to the table to be part of this discussion. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Chris. And just to speak about the term affordable housing so that we are all clear that what we're talking about. True in perpetuity affordable housing that is subsidized is what I am calling true in perpetuity subsidized housing. That's the HUD meaning of affordable housing. What the term has been used in Richmond in discussions quite a bit for affordable housing is housing that people can afford, that their kids can come back to live in, that teachers and nurses, this is what they mean by affordable housing. So I would like there to be a place for that term. And what I've tried to do is mostly couch it in terms of workforce. So that's the middle group, not low-income HUD subsidized housing, but housing that is at 80% AMI, no paperwork, no income sensitivity, but it's at an affordable rent. So, if we can if you want to think of other terms, Chris, that's fine. I try always to say either it's true, income sensitive, HUD subsidized affordable housing, or it's for affordable housing, which is workforce housing that people can live in and is affordable. Chris, did you want to say something?
Yeah, no, I think this is a good discussion to have to sort of really make this differentiation here. And I think well, I don't want to make assumptions about what we all want, but I want that too, Virginia. I want to
Yeah.
have, a housing market that, in an ideal sense, would have a full range of options that 95% of the people in Vermont could afford, and it would be, healthy and safe and energy efficient. And then the 5% of people who can't afford it, that there would be subsidized housing for. But that's not what we have today. What we have today is a housing market that used to be much more like that and has become less and less over time. And my concern is that without taking particular care, new housing that's built to target the medium to lower income range of the income market today. If nothing else changes, it's going to continue the same process that we've seen over the last 2 decades and will become unaffordable, and then over the next 5 to 6 years. It will be the same unit, but because of the population pressures, because of income inequality in the country, much less Vermont, we're going to see that housing being progressively priced out of the range of lower income Vermonters. And now that's going to happen to the majority of units we're talking about regardless, so unless something changes, like I said. What I'm talking about is specifically looking to options for including housing that does have some kind of constraint on the rent increase because it involves federal or state subsidies or some other kind of regulatory tool, in the way that we already have some housing in town that is subject to those kind of constraints. And I'm talking about adding to that based on the success of our experience with that class of housing already.
Yeah, so my focus has been on the workforce affordable, that group, because it's easier to work with, it's less contentious, and it doesn't require that somebody else owns the property and does the financing and does the management, which Buttermilk is not interested in. I think as we think about a counter proposal, we don't want to put in things that are non-starters for Buttermilk, because we're wasting our time if we put in things that are non-starters. So we may be able to control the 80% AMI. I don't see them being accepting in any way of any kind of the kind of affordable housing that the affordable nonprofits make, where they own it, they manage it, they get 15 sources of financing. This is not the interest of this group here. So I think personally that the best we can do is try to have workforce housing that is affordable. Now, I agree with Chris that maybe there's an opportunity to hold back a little bit on the amount that they can increase the rent all the time. So, but
I wasn't suggesting that we could do that. I don't think that's a practically possible thing for the town to do, unless you're talking about setting up some kind of regulatory capacity significantly beyond what we currently have.
well, so when we get to affordable housing, we can talk about this, because Keith and I have talked about it quite a bit, is what kind of strategy we could have to try to maintain those small apartments at 80% of AMI. So let's wait. We'll get there when we talk about a couple of other pieces, maybe that aren't going to be so difficult. So it seemed at our last meeting that most people were relatively amenable to reducing the amount of commercial space for the very reasons that Chris suggested. It's a different time. I did have a conversation with a local Richmond resident commercial lender who sent me material on the amount of commercial vacancy in the area, which is huge. The fact that no commercial properties are being financed right now. So it seems like this is a real thing. They cannot get financial support lending if a lot of commercial space is involved. So I'm willing to accept that. And it seems like that fits in with, what we've heard, what we know. So what I'd like to look at is what we think. Do we anywhere from getting rid of all the commercial space, getting rid of half the commercial space? What's a comfortable level for us? Granted that none of this space faces onto the main road of Bridge Street. The only pieces that do are in Building 1 already. So I'd like to look at the amount that we're comfortable with reducing it if everybody is in fact agreeable to some amount of reduction. Chris?
Yeah, I think this is a great idea. One thing I wanted to say though is that I was struck recently by driving around Williston and noticing the amount of new commercial development that's going on there right now. And that isn't necessarily at odds with what you just said about the market in general, but I wonder whether it wouldn't behoove us to have somebody come and talk to the planning commission about the commercial market space as the commission. We've sort of been bringing in, Buttermilk's perspectives, and there's conversations you've had and conversations I've had, but this was a central debate when this whole relationship with Buttermilk started, and I think it might be a good idea for us to sort of elevate the data sources that we're using, by putting them on the record, if you see what I'm saying.
Mm. Yeah, well, that is possible. We can certainly do that. I do know that from the report that this lender sent me, there's a forecast, a real estate forecast lending booklet that's published. Well, it's 400 pages. He only sent me a couple of pages, but there's 219,000 vacant square feet in Williston of office space. So those apartment buildings that you see, some of which have ground floor commercial, some of which don't have any, like the latest one on Cottonwood, they don't have any ground floor commercial. So, there's clearly a huge amount of vacant space. So, all right, somebody's child is shrieking. That's okay. So we could think about doing that. Does anyone have a feeling at the moment? Oh, Joy wanted to say something. Yeah, go ahead, Joy.
A couple things. There's actually a report that's done, I think, every 6 months by Allen and Brooks.
Yeah.
Both on the residential and commercial.
Yeah, that's the one I got from the lender.
All right. Yeah. And then the other thing is, I don't know if anybody saw 60 Minutes in the last week or so, but they did an episode or an article on the commercial real estate market. And, it's everything that we talk about, but it's actually kind of worse than we all think it is. And how basically banks they're extending these loans for periods of time. So it doesn't look like things are as bad as they really are, but they're not going to be able to continue to do that forever. And it's all potentially going to come crashing down in the next few years. But basically it's everywhere in the country. And it was bad in Vermont before that all happened, because I remember I would come to the meetings and say, you can't find a commercial tenant, that there isn't any, commercial need. It's really bad. And it just got worse. So, I mean, I don't think there's any question about whether or not, the commercial real estate market is in pretty horrendous shape. So I think we all just have to agree that that's the situation. And, we need housing, and we got to scrap this need for commercial space. It's just not there. And you know what? If we get enough housing in Richmond, maybe then we could use more commercial space. But right now we don't have enough to support it. So that's the situation. And that's my thoughts. I posted the link to the 60 Minutes story in the chat.
Oh, thanks. And let me be clear, I'm for the idea of reducing the commercial space. I
didn't think you weren't at all.
Yeah,
I
no,
just am
I mean,
trying
I
to
was
get everybody shouldn't even have this conversation anymore. It's
no,
pointless.
well, I'm just saying that, and as these things go, that as we move this idea forward, people who were involved even 10 years ago will come out and say, hey, what about the commercial space that we were promised at that time? And I think we need to be ready for that. And is that Allen and Brooks report something that we can add to meeting materials so that it's publicly available, or is that something you got to pay for?
Well, I think the people who get it have a subscription and you're not really supposed to share it with other people. Is that correct, Joy? That is what this lender told me. So I'm not really supposed to share it
Pretty
with
much,
other
but I
people.
wouldn't be surprised if the town went to them and, well, but then you're asking to publish it. I don't know. I have a contact there that I could pass on to you, but they're super helpful. So
Yeah. Or maybe we can, have Joy report back in what she's read. We trust what she says. I don't know that we need to see it with our very own eyes. Anyway, so is there anyone who is opposed to reducing the commercial space? Let's see if I can see any hands or anything. And keep in mind that we already have the 4,000 square feet on the ground floor of building 1, plus some, which I believe is in the basement, rented by Green Sea, which was a pandemic era thing. I don't know if they're really going to keep renting that space. So we will still have that. Okay. We will still have that commercial space, and that is the space that is the most forward facing, or the most likely to be useful to people who are on the street. Okay, so can we talk a little bit about how much we want? Are we comfortable with removing the whole requirement? Are people comfortable with that? Are people comfortable with removing 2/3 of it? And the idea is that that space would be used to put dwelling units in the space that has been freed up. There will be dwelling units because they are proposing to have additional dwelling units in the same building, the same square footage of a building. So the way they would do this, there are 2 ways that they've suggested. One is putting the units in the space that the commercial has freed up, getting rid of the commercial requirement has freed up, and also making some of the larger units smaller. So would anyone like to stick their neck out and say, let's remove all of it, or let's remove half of it, or let's remove 2/3 of it? Ian.
I'll stick my neck out and say, let's remove all of it.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks, somebody, for sticking their neck out. That's good. So what do people think about that? Joy, what do you think about that? Can we remove all that commercial space?
yeah, I think we can. They can't even rent the space in the front building, right? Isn't there vacancy in the commercial?
Well, it's a little unclear whether there is right now, because Green Sea has just been sort of sucking it up as storage space. Whatever is extra there, whether they're always going to go on doing that is unclear. It was not a long-term plan of theirs. It was kind of a pandemic thing. It's not like it's merchants, it's part of an existing business. So
either way, I say we remove it.
okay. Ian, you want to follow up some more on that?
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that we're talking about building 2.
We are talking about building
Okay.
2. Building
Right.
1 retains the commercial space that is
Okay.
already in it. That's what
Thank you.
we're talking about, building 2. So, anybody else want
A
to? Chris?
question, if we moved it entirely for building 2, does that mean that necessarily we would lose the option of requiring it for subsequent development?
No.
Well, no. So what we have thought about so far at our last meeting was not going beyond building 2. And this is in keeping with our feeling that the master planning concept is kind of flawed. We don't know what's going to happen in the future. We don't know what people are going to want in the future. However, if we allow them to increase the density for the number of units they want to put in building 2, then they're not going to have any more dwelling units available. If they want to put building 3 and 4, they would be commercial buildings, unless they came back to the planning commission and went through this again.
Okay.
And so, yeah. So, and it also doesn't completely remove the ability to have commercial units. They're just not required. You know, they feel that if they have all these tenants, they're going to want a bagel shop, or they're going to want a little gym, or, you know, so there may be some way we can have convertible space in some part of the basement. I don't know, you know, is that, maybe that would be a thing. Or if we just remove the commercial, you know, Buttermilk feels that commercial tenants, if they can get them, are good tenants generally. So they would be interested in having these smaller scale services that could fit in, let's say, a 500 square foot space in the ground floor, if they can get them. If they can't get them, you know, it could be a residential unit. Maybe it's one with a little home office space. The problem with the commercial space is the lenders take one look at that and they say, the worth of this building, the value of this building is not enough to justify the fact that you have commercial space that you are not going to be able to rent. So if they can't get lending for it, then they won't build it. They can't build it. They can't put 31 units. They can't put any number of units if there's no financing because of that commercial space requirement. So it doesn't prevent them from having it. They could have commercial space if they wished to have it, but it's not a requirement. So it looks like Ian and Joy are good with taking it all out. Anybody else want to talk about that? Personally, I'm okay with that. I think we need the housing, and I think, as Joy pointed out, if we have more people living here, they're at least going to support the businesses we have, the commercial enterprises we have, and there will be room for other people who will wish to start commercial enterprises if there's enough people to support them.
Yes, I support it as well, but not without caveats. And the caveats are that it's dependent on you know, an agreement on the composition of the units in the building, you know, at least to some extent in terms of size, you know, and affordability, as you were saying. So, you know, I certainly don't. I think it's just bad policy to hand over, you know, basically our main negotiating point and get nothing in return. And we do
yeah.
have other objectives, so I want to make sure we keep an eye on those.
Yeah, agreed. I mean, this is going to be a major compromise, but what we want to look at is what's in Richmond's best interest. Is it in Richmond's best interest to have nothing there in that lot besides building 1 and have it remain a vacant lot because they can't get financing for it? Or is it better to get rid of the commercial requirement so that we can at least have 31 units and other things that we will then go on as part of the negotiation to require in exchange for giving up this commercial and allowing them to proceed with some kind of development. Joy.
Can we look at it a different way, that we get more housing? I mean,
Yeah.
that's like, we do get something out of it. We get more housing. So
Right.
I get that, like, you want to hold the cards and control, but you know, we like your letter said, and it's constant conversation. I have people asking me all the time what we're going to do about it. People don't want it in the village. Don't change my street. Don't change my neighborhood. I mean, this is the spot to do it. So, and we can do just this building and then cross the bridge the next time, you know, they go to do the next one or however, but I'm looking at it as we're not giving something up, we're getting something out of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I would agree. And I think that if we could persuade people who weren't on that page that that is good, that we are getting something good out of it, which is more housing, then we would be home free. The problem is there are some people that we have to persuade that that's actually a good thing and is not a negative thing. So that's where I'm going. I'm trying to make it persuasive, but if we can work up the fact that this is a plus for us and this is a good place for it, we're not giving up anything else to do that here, you know, then that's a good piece of PR. So, Adam.
Yeah, I was just going to echo what Joy said. I think this is ultimately getting it's kind of missing middle housing in town in a location that's walkable, undeveloped, doesn't require any significant changes to an existing neighborhood, which is obviously a sticking point for many people. Seems like a win-win-win. I mean, in an ideal world, we would have commercial on the first floor and it would be vibrantly full of businesses, and that would be great. But that doesn't seem to be a reality for any area right now to rapidly fill up new commercial. And so I think in my mind, I have no problem getting rid of the commercial requirement for this building. And I think that if anything, that puts us on stronger footing if they come back for further development to require commercial for a few reasons. One, because we have been flexible this time, but two, because if we were to add more units at a future date, a different planning commission, that added density would possibly support more businesses and more commercials. So I think we're kind of setting ourselves up to have more options in the future. Is how I'm trying to look at it optimistically. I hope that's the case. So.
Okay. So is there anyone who is not on board with reducing the commercial requirement to 0 in building 2 and also asking for some other things in return? Is there anyone who's not on board with that? This is a good time to speak. See if I see any hands.
Your hand's up, Adam.
Oh, I apologize.
Adam's hand is still up. Anybody else's hand? I don't see any other hands. So there are no other hands up. So I am going to, for the moment, assume that that's a place that we're going to start, that we are going to give up the commercial requirement to allow further development here.
Can I suggest that we state that a different way, which would be that we are willing to give up the commercial development in return for unspecified things, which is the next stage of business, figuring out what those are.
Yeah, well, I mean, we also want to take into consideration that what we're getting is more middle housing.
Oh, yeah.
Middle income housing. So that's a positive. I don't think we should ignore that and just
But that
say,
doesn't need to be negotiated because both sides want that. What I'm talking about are things, a lot of them along the line of what you talked about in some of the materials you sent out ahead of time, that it would be very nice to get the developer to do, particularly if the emphasis is going to be on housing and essentially making this into a new neighborhood.
mm-hmm. All right, well, let's move on from that point and let's look at I guess we could look maybe next at the affordable housing question. And this paragraph in my memo has kind of summed up the fact that I don't believe it is in our interest to ask for true HUD affordable housing for somebody to manage the income sensitivity piece. If there is a mechanism for us to say, all right, here's the requirement. Each year, Buttermilk, you tell us the 4 units or 5 units, you know, given the numbers that they've submitted, what the rent is. Is it 80% of AMI? It's this unit. It's unit number 12, and the rent is this. The size of it is this. There's no income sensitivity piece. That's the piece that is very difficult to manage. Revy thought we could do it. He thought we'd be willing to kick people out if they went over the limit of what was 30% of AMI. I was very skeptical. I don't think we are capable of doing that. So I think just having units, places to live that are at 80% of AMI would be a possible thing that we could do fairly simply. We'd have to run it by the legal people. Keith can talk about that a little bit, and it's probably, the lenders probably aren't going to go for that if it's in perpetuity. It's probably going to have to be for a specified period of time. And then that's another thing that is going to have to be possibly renegotiated if there's any further residential units. It's something that possibly, what we're hoping, it doesn't reduce the value of this building and the cash flow enough to make it totally not feasible. So, Chris.
Well, I have a question for Keith, actually, and this is just something that I don't know very much about in Vermont, but as far as I know, there is no rent control in Vermont.
That's correct.
So what you're talking about, Virginia, is some version of rent control. So if we wanted to do that, we'd have to establish that independent from any existing regulatory structure, which I think compounds the problem. I mean, I agree with you. I don't think it's practical. I think Revy was wrong about that. So when we talk, but this is again part of being very clear what we mean when we talk about affordable. If it's really is, what is Buttermilk saying that they are willing to offer a brand new unit for when it comes on the market, built under this agreement that we would have with them. I think that we might be able to enforce at 80% of AMI. But after that, I think it's all, we don't have the mechanism to police that anymore. We can't police people's incomes. We can't police the market for housing and what Buttermilk then decides to charge afterwards. So when we talk about affordability in that context, it's what the unit gets charged for on the day that it's finished and goes on the market. Is that correct, Keith? Am I looking at that the right way?
Yeah, I think that you touched on a conversation that Virginia and I had this morning also, and that has to do with the policing aspect of it. That's something that I would have to run through legal, as she alluded to. I do believe that local municipalities have installed that in their zoning regulations for multifamily or multi-dwellings units, depending on what the threshold is. And I think Adam could probably speak to that to a certain extent. I think we talked about that a couple of weeks ago. I don't want to put you on the spot, Adam. But the mechanism would be in the zoning regulations and some type of report on an annual basis to the select board. But you're right. What is the policing? What's the cudgel that we have? That would be the next step of research that I would do.
Yeah, and my feeling that, if you made it a zoning requirement, so it would be policed like any other zoning requirement. Are they in compliance or not? If we put in a requirement, you have to submit in January of each year the 4 units that are affordable. Here's what they're being charged. That's 80%. Here's AMI. So say they didn't do that. And
Right.
they violated that agreement routinely. What is at stake for them is the future, is their future. They will now be in violation of the zoning ordinance. And if they're in violation for 10 years and they come to the next planning commission and say, well, we want to do this, then there really will be a problem for them. They have been in permanent violation of this zoning requirement. So I don't know if people think that's enough, but it's something.
Yeah.
And they are going to have to come back. You know, they have this master development plan with the building 3 and 4, all commercial at this point. They're going to want to come back, and the planning commission is going to say, what about this? You didn't do this. You agreed to do this and you didn't do it. Joy.
Could we revoke their certificate of occupancy if they don't do what they're supposed to do?
Well,
Which would-
I don't know. I'd have to really research that. I mean, once you get that CO, you're off and running. I really can't push it or pull it back. But I mean, that could be a mechanism. I mean, but what do you do after that? If they don't have a CO, then they don't have a certificate of occupancy, which means they'd have to kick everybody out. I don't know what the unintended consequences of that would be, Joy, to be honest with you, but something that we can pursue.
Yeah, it would be something that really needed looking into, but the reason that I put it in here is because it's popular right now to have, and for good reason, you know, to have this workforce housing that is at 80% AMI. This is an underserved population. We need to do something for them. So this would be much easier than going with the HUD income sensitive piece, which seems to me, and from previous planning commission discussions, which we had all the way back when the first zoning was put in place for Jolena Court, we couldn't make it work. Joy, I think your hand is still up. She's taking her hand down. Okay, Ian.
I don't want to complicate this conversation, but I think it's important to keep in the back of your mind that Buttermilk won't necessarily always be the owner of this property.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, whoever's the owner of the property would have to abide by the zoning regulations if it's in the zoning regulations, presumably. And, you know, I'm not saying that this could be done, but I thought it was an idea that was worth bringing up because affordable housing is going to be a popular selling point, or workforce affordable housing. Mark.
Hey there. So yeah, we're talking a little bit about what is affordable housing and enforcing the AMI rates and that kind of thing. But I think we might be out of step, out of order in the discussion process, because in the letter Buttermilk sent, they would not be willing to do any consideration of rent control, or however we want to phrase it, unless they get more than the 45 units they're currently zoned for. So the decision I think we need to make first is, are we going to go beyond 45 units on this property at this point? And leave, you know, then we can get back to regulating AMI levels beforehand.
Well, yeah, go ahead, Mark. Are you done?
Yep.
Yeah, okay. So I feel that it's all a negotiation. These things are on the table. They offered 15% of 125 units. Are they willing to go with 15% of 50 units? You know, it's a, sure, we can get rid of the letter if people want to do that. I'm fine with just talking about these things. They have offered several times, and they say that in building 1, they have several apartments that are rented at 80% AMI. So that they're not required to do. They're doing it of their own free will. So it's possible, there may be a way that that can happen. And I did, in talking to this Richmond commercial lender, I asked him about that. Would it be helpful if some of the units were considered workforce or affordable? And he said that he thought a small amount that didn't detract from the overall value and could be made up by the rent on the other ones might appeal to lenders who would feel that it was something that you were giving to the town. I mean, we understand that everything that Buttermilk does is not for the good of the town. We understand that. They're developers. They have a business, like Chris said, but that it might not be a total negative for a bank to see that there were a few things that were done to make it more desirable, like the green space and the neighborhood amenities and those kinds of things. They're looking for the long-term value of this building, and those might be things, that work into that. Mark.
Thanks. Yeah, you're right. I mean, I think it would be wonderful to have low income capped properties. But if we look at the letter from Buttermilk, at least we focus on the table. It says under item 2, no change in residential density, and then in red it says, therefore, it would not achieve 2022 requests for affordable units or deliver on the recent discussions by the select board. But if the PC believes that capping residential is required, this option is possible. So they can go ahead with building 2 with just 31 units and whatever limit of commercial that they deem is affordable. But it's not going to include any residential. So again, I go back to let's have a talk about density, because I think that's where the rubber's hitting the road on our decision-making process.
Okay, Chris. Thank you, Mark.
Yeah, I basically just want to repeat what you said earlier, Virginia, which is that this is a negotiation. Buttermilk's told us what they want in that letter. Now we need to tell them what we want. I don't consider anything in that letter a limitation on us deciding what we want.
Yep, I would agree with that. I mean, I do think that to tell them they have to have true low income sensitive HUD subsidized
I don't think anybody's
housing
talking about that anymore,
is a
though.
non-starter. I think that is a non-starter. But this is not a non-starter because they've talked about it in several of their pieces, that they do it already in building 1, and that, they could do maybe 15%, and if there were more units, but maybe they can do 15% of less units. We don't know that. So I think we want to decide if that is something that is worth it to us to do. All right, and we could.
Affordable housing is good, and we would want to be able to get as much as possible. Doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Of willing to give for the density we're willing to allow, along with probably some other concessions, perhaps parking or other costs.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and I think where we should start is to look at the agreement for building 1, and if there's anything that didn't get done that we thought should be done there, and then say, well, of course, we start with you fulfilling, these unfulfilled parts of your agreement. The only one that I'm personally aware of is I believe there was supposed to be a electric vehicle charger.
That's correct.
It's installed as part
That and a dumpster enclosure.
Okay.
And that was put as a condition of approval for building 2, that has to be accomplished before a CO for building 2 is completed, or something along those lines.
Yeah, so we start there, and then like I said, I like a lot of the stuff you put in in your piece, Virginia, about how do we make this a attractive residential area?
Okay, so let's talk. Oh, go ahead, Adam.
Oh, I was just going to say that one of the ones what Mark was saying, I think that the what we're going to call affordable housing and the density are closely related, so it might make sense to get that tough conversation started. I know you outlined pretty clearly in your memo some options and what neighboring districts have for density for comparison. That was it.
Okay, yep, that sounds good. We can go right into density. Affordable housing is a little subsection of density, and keeping in mind what Joy said, which is more units is a good thing for Richmond. It's a good thing. It's not a bad thing. But we would like to, if we're going to make this into a neighborhood, we would like to have some neighborhood amenities. But so how do people feel in general about the density question? The easiest way and the most logical way, I feel, is to make the density, currently 15 units per developable acre, the same as the village downtown density. To consider this a part of the downtown and to go with the village downtown density, which is 24 units per acre. That would allow them to have their 55 units, which they're interested in building 2, and there would be a couple of units left over. That seems like, I hate to do things that are just a random number here and a random number there. There's an actual rationale for that number. That is the number that we have assigned to the village downtown, because that is the density that exists there. That's why we use that number of 24 units per acre. So can we not make this density the same as that, which is approximately what they say they need? They're going to fit these units in the same building. There will be more small units. There will be less big units. The number of people will probably be about the same, because, if you take a 2-bedroom and you make it into 2 studios, you're going to have the 2 or 3 people who are in the 2-bedroom, or 4 people. Instead, you're going to have 1 person in each one of those studios, for instance. So to me, the increased density, I would like to understand what the difficulties are that people have with just the concept of increasing the density. Is it the number of people? It's not going to be a bigger building. It's going to be exactly the same size of building and the same placement of the building. So it's not that this is going to be a building that's twice as big. There are just going to be more small units in it. Does anyone want to talk about density in general? Why people have trouble with the density concept? Or maybe you're in support of it. Okay, Mark?
Yes, I'll say that my concerns over density increases stem from not the fact that Richmond needs more housing, and there's a lot of different ways we haven't even begun to explore where we could improve that and focus on. But at that specific location, and I tried to make this point in the last meeting, 12 units is one thing. 45 units is a whole nother thing. That 45 units has higher density than any other street times 2 that feeds on to Bridge Street, which means all that traffic is going to be coming out right there. And it's going to be coming out across from the railroad street. There's going to be a new market going in there, and there's going to be traffic there and additional, and there's an awful lot of open land. I mean, there's undeveloped land that is associated with the Richmond hardware store that could eventually turn into other options. Now, granted, that's down the road. So to be more concise, still at 45 units, twice the number of any other side street, pouring out onto that street with the intersection offset, mind you, offset intersection of the Railroad Street Marketplace and the proximity of the railroad tracks. Seems to me like it would be a very reasonable approach to go with the 45 units that they're zoned for now and see what happens before we kick it up to 72, 27 more, which is now 6 times the number of units that are there now. So there is no relativity that you can extrapolate from what's there now to what it's going to be. So yeah, 45 units I think is a reasonable number to start with. If it turns out in 5 years, chances are the housing crisis won't be eliminated in 5 years, and we feel that Richmond has the responsibility to resolve that housing crisis. We can then consider building 3 with another 27 units in it, or maybe even more. If 45 isn't an impact, then maybe doubling that would be a considered option, because we know what we're looking at, we know what we're dealing with, we've had a chance to experience what that traffic and congestion can do to Bridge Street. So yeah, I'd like to keep it at 45.
So is your main concern the traffic?
It is, for the most part,
Mhm.
yes. The traffic, I think, is a high concern for me. I think there's some other things that we could factor into this whole conversation, being more public parking, maybe green space, those kinds of things. But since we're focusing on density right now, yes, ultimately that traffic, you take that 45 units and you put it out at the Willis farm, is it going to have as big an impact and congestion as it would where it is? Probably not. Does it need a traffic study? We've got a traffic study. It says it doesn't qualify for any kind of lights or adjustments. But again, that traffic study, and this is a point I've been trying to work through today in conversations with some folks, but that traffic study, those numbers are national study numbers that are designed to go from anywhere. And it's a big difference for that piece of property where it is and its related intersections with other roads compared to, putting 45 lots in Finney's Crossing up in Williston, where you wouldn't even know that 45 additional units went in, because the traffic is designed, there's lights, there's multiple ins and outs, there's all these other considerations. Where that piece of property happens to be is already, to my mind, a congested thoroughfare. Making it worse, we're going to make it worse. We're going to make it worse when we go to 45. It's going to be an impact. Don't think that it's not. But how much? We don't know. We don't know how the traffic's going to respond at that particular intersection, more so than others. So yeah, 45.
Okay. All right. Got it. Let's go to Adam.
Yeah, I guess I can well, anecdotally speak to Mark's traffic concern, since I have poor planning and I end up going to the hardware store every morning during the peak traffic hours. And it's hard to pull out of the home supply / market, whatever, intersection. Every time it's hard to pull out. And I can't remember a single time that there is another car pulling out of the 12 units that are there. So even if we count that as one, multiplied times 6, I mean, that's 6 times in the last few weeks I've been paying attention that I would have even seen a car there and they wouldn't have been in the way. So I understand that the traffic's bad, but I just have a real hard time seeing how having reviewed a bunch of traffic studies in the past, my previous jobs and stuff, it seems to me that the driving factors in traffic are generally outlying towns and large suburban areas getting concentrated in center of town intersections. And so this, 70 units there isn't going to have nearly the impact that the hundreds of houses in Richmond, Huntington, Heinsberg, et cetera, that commute through there. And so I understand that, obviously this isn't going to make the traffic better, but I guess in my mind, it's such an insignificant addition to the traffic congestion compared to the massive amounts of, maybe not massive compared to what we would like for the housing crisis, but the large amounts of development that have occurred in Richmond and surrounding towns over the last decade. And so the traffic's really driven by all of these factors. And so using that as a single reason to not increase the density here just seems short-sighted and kind of maybe missing the mark in my mind. But I just don't see how the 70, I guess it would be 70 trip ends a day on average that we would create, or 72 times 1.25 trip ends a day is really going to impact that compared to the hundreds and hundreds of cars that come through from surrounding towns and the parents who refuse to send their kids on a school bus every day. So I'm not sure what the number is. I think removing the commercial density or the commercial requirement and sticking with the density would be my minimum that I think is reasonable. The slightly OCD and engineer in me wants to bring the density in line with some surrounding districts because I think that's clean. It works well. We have a precedent for having that density in other areas. And it also emphasizes that we're not creating a new neighborhood. We're creating a new part of a neighborhood and part of the downtown area. So I guess I would like, just for our own purposes, it kind of emphasizes that we're adding housing to our town. We're not creating a new subset, a new section of town and all that, which I think is an important distinction. Maybe more of a perception, but so I would lean towards the 24 simply because I think that it is more of an indication of expanding the downtown, which village downtown district. But I guess I'm open to be persuaded either way.
Okay, great, thanks. Connie from our housing committee.
Yes, and I'm not asking this question as a housing committee member. I'm just curious as a Richmond resident. I don't live in the town center. Virginia, you said that if the density were increased to 72 instead of 45, it wouldn't add people to the, it wouldn't increase the number of people that were there. You just have fewer people per unit because the square footage would still be the same. It's the same footprint. And my question
Well, I said that might be true. It might be true. I mean, I'm not saying for sure that it would be true. If you can fit 3 people into a 300 square foot studio, go right ahead and hope they don't kill each other. But
no, I agree with your intuition. And to me, that took my mind to then who are we inviting to Richmond? And my goal here, please, is that I want to be as inclusive as possible, but a family can't fit into a studio apartment, and they're not going to put their kids in one apartment and the grown-ups in another apartment. It doesn't work like that. So either you have a unit that's big enough for a family, or you don't have a family in that building. And so I think that arrangement is important in thinking about, yes, we want to provide housing opportunities. We want to provide housing opportunities that are more affordable. And we also want to be inclusive of a diversity of kinds of families or groups of people who could come and live in Richmond. And the smaller the unit size, the more restrictive that is my assumption. And I'm no expert. So I just wanted to check that out with the Planning Commission and see if that's worth considering as one of your constraints or one of the things that you want to do.
Well, so Buttermilk's goal is to have a variety of sizes of apartments, like Building 1 has, where there are 2 bedrooms, 1 bedroom, and studios. So there would be all of those 3 different sizes. They would not all be studios. And if we free up the ground floor from commercial, there could be a variety of different houses in there. Maybe we could, encourage them or require them to have a couple of like senior accessible houses on the ground floor. We've thought about that in the past as something worth exploring. Something that are a couple of accessible units, maybe a 1 bedroom or different sizes. Anyway, so their goal is not to have all studios. Their goal is to have a mix so that they get some families. They have in their tenant list, they have a mother with a couple of kids in one of the apartments. They do have a range of people. Not so many seniors, I noticed, mostly young people. But anyway, thank you, Connie.
Thank you.
Yep, Chris.
Thanks. Connie brought up a point that I avoided bringing up earlier. So, AMI is a single value by state that's differentiated between metro and non-metro areas. So AMI doesn't really say anything about the size of the household that's involved. So when we talk about having an apartment that's available for 80% of AMI, there are a couple ways of getting to that. One is to charge less for it, and the other is simply to make it smaller. It's possible for an apartment to be both 80% of AMI and market rate by being small. It could be a small apartment that you don't charge much for, that you charge 80% of AMI for because it's a studio apartment, is my understanding about it. Keith, am I wrong about that?
I don't think so, but I do want to add, and the purpose of my hand being up is that when you do AMI for affordable housing, you also include the utilities in that figure. It's not just the rent, so keep that in mind.
But I think what Connie has brought up is a further complication to this, and it's really not anything that we can do anything about. Again, because it would involve policing the number of people who are living in a unit, for example. If I don't know that we have clearly defined objectives in terms of the development of new housing units, segmented by number of people in a household. Like, are we specifically targeting families with children? I know people want to do that. Are we specifically targeting young people who are, relatively fresh out of school and looking for a place to live in town? I've definitely heard people wanting to do that too. These are all good things, but the devil's in the details, right? And I think when we talk about what is on the table now, what we'll end up getting are more a larger supply of smaller units that are appropriate for singles and maybe couples, not necessarily more housing for families.
Yeah, that's a good point, Chris. But one thing that I've thought of that we could ask Buttermilk as we make, in this negotiating procedure, is to provide a picture of what this building would be like. Because, the only goal that we've had so far is to have a variety of housing. And that may be all that a small town can do in terms of the policing. But if we have a variety, some 2 bedroom, some 1 bedroom, some studio. So one thing I've thought of asking them, apart from also a parking plan, is what would this building look like? How many of these different units would, and our goal being to have a variety. So not necessarily, we haven't gone to 2 of these, 3 of these, but at least there would be like 4 2-bedrooms and 6 1-bedrooms, which is sort of the best, most versatile size. And then, 12 studios or whatever. So I don't know if people think that's a good idea, just to get some idea of what it would look like, this building.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
The other thing about the traffic is that if we remove the commercial requirement, a lot of the traffic goes away. Because if the commercial spaces are actually filled, then there are people coming and going. There's both more traffic and more parking required for the commercial uses. So, these would be maybe limited time periods where people were going or coming back, returning.
Yeah, I mean, I would tend to agree on the commercial end. I think on the retail end, that'd be a different story.
Yeah.
So that's just me spitballing right here. So.
Okay. Anyone else have any comments that you want to make about the number of units? Lisa, Corey, I know you had spoken about having more housing. How do you feel about having more housing in this area? Is not this an opportunity, fairly painless opportunity, except for maybe the traffic getting worse, for adding to our housing stock?
Yeah, I think it's great to have a lot of housing there. I like the idea that it's right downtown. Hopefully, it will encourage more people to walk, and people will get used to the idea of walking around town instead of always driving in and driving in and driving in. And maybe we'll even be able to get some little amount of public transportation going up to the park and ride from downtown. So I think all of that is great. I think the variety of sizes is also a good idea. I mean, I don't have any experience in this area except for my own, and I feel like to predict based on the size of a dwelling or an apartment, how many people. I mean, in just in my house, it's a 3-bedroom house. We've had 6 people living here for years, and now there's 1 person living here. So same size house, and definitely I can imagine, young couples who can't afford the house. It de facto becomes affordable housing when your entire family is, in a 1-bedroom, or you're a divorced parent, you have your kids half time. You just want to get a 1-bedroom for the times the kids are there. So I think that's hard to predict, but yeah, I like it. I'm not so worried about the additional traffic, but I don't have any experience there. But I think it's great to get lots more housing in town where people can walk to everything they need.
Well, this has definitely been a goal in regional planning for a long time, to have walkable downtowns. And if you want to talk about the traffic, if you put all the houses out in the burbs, there's going to be a lot more traffic.
Yeah.
The people at Jolena Court are going to walk to the grocery store. It's right across the street. They're not going to drive to the grocery store for the most part. I mean, there might be a few people, but so. All right. Anybody else want to weigh in on the density question? Lisa, do you want to weigh in on the density question?
This one, this Lisa?
That Lisa, yeah, you're the
Okay.
Lisa.
I think the density
the other
is,
Lisa.
yeah, you're right. I think the density is, it's just kind of a number. I mean, we have to have some kind of stipulation in our rules. You can't put 80 people in a place, if a large family moves in, you got to have some limits just for safety's sake. I think the fire official will probably back that up. But otherwise, there are people who can live in close quarters, or people who can't. So fine. I mean, up to a point, I'm kind of fine with it. I think legal limits should be observed, but beyond that, sure, the density's fine. And the I hope there's a second building. I hope building two. I've unfortunately missed part of the narrative. I got a call from another select board member. We had to talk. So, but the second building, I do hope that what's going on now enables them to finance that and complete it, build it out. Maybe not the other buildings, but that would be a good point at which to pause and see if it's enough. And if they think they want more, the town's going to have to base it on the experience we've had with the first two buildings.
Great. Yeah, and their longer term plans don't envision buildings 3 and 4 for some number of years,
Right.
5, 10 years, 15 years.
Mhm.
They're going to have to recover from building number 2, which will take a couple of years. They have to go through Act 250 and all
Right.
that kind of stuff. So, and it seems like, is there really a difference between 31 units and 55 units?
Right. The grand
So,
scheme of things, not at
in
all.
the grand scheme of things. So,
But I like the idea of the housing in the village like that. There's not many places that could be put in without removing something that's already there. This is a no lose, all win, I think. So good for you.
Well, and also from the perspective of a former water and sewer
Yes.
Board member, it's like, yeah,
It's very welcome in that regard. Yeah,
definitely.
it's almost a subsidy.
yes. Yep, this reduces the rates for all the customers.
Yeah, there's a win in it for everybody that's on sewer and water. So yeah.
So, Allison, did you have anything you wanted to weigh in?
I'm here listening.
Yeah.
I think that this sounds like a great project. My concern is that it may be the wrong location, and the reason that it's the wrong location is not the fault of anybody that started this project several years ago. I'm very, very concerned about the flooding, about the real damage that's been done by all the floods from the recent storms that we've had this past year. I guess maybe I'm influenced by Montpelier. I grew up in Montpelier, and it's just heartbreaking to go there and see what a mess that's made. It's kind of disintegrated the whole central community that it used to be, that the whole center of the Vermont government was on one street down in the middle of town. And it's all over the place now, and it's just not the same. And I'm just concerned that the way the topography of our land is, if we have more floods, we're just going to have a lot of damage. That's my concern. And I'm sitting here, listening to all these good arguments that everybody's making and agreeing with just about everything that people are saying. But I don't think that Richmond is in the floodplain. I think Richmond is the floodplain.
Well, there are parts of Richmond that are not in the floodplain, and this is one of them.
Currently defined.
It's currently defined, and that's all we can do is to look at the maps and define it.
If the proposed buildings as they have been proposed flood, I mean, we everything, including Stone Corral, would have to be flooded for these buildings to flood. So if you're concerned about that happening, I mean, I don't think that's entirely impossible, but that's more of a fundamental discussion about whether our town should even exist as it does now. And so I don't even know if that's something that's within the purview. Like, are we going to decide that we need to move everything in Richmond and that like every single thing and that the train tracks can be underwater and all that? I mean, I just don't. I lived in a house that's flooded. I went through Irene, stuff flooded. I lived in Waterbury during Irene. House had 6 feet of water. I shoveled mud out of the fire department. I drove trucks through flooded water. I drove a truck through the flooded water in our flooding and had it stall.
So you know what I mean.
I know, yeah, but I think that the height that the water would have to get to for this specific project, I think the town center, very valid concern. But I think it's deceiving. It looks like the water is very close to where they're proposing their project, and it's about 10 to 12 feet higher than what their town center is going to have to be. And so that amount of water, that's not double the flooding of Irene. Because of how floodplains act, that's like 6 to 10 times more water than during Irene, which was more water than we've had even in these last 2 floods. So I don't think that's an unfounded concern that flooding broadly is a concern, but I think how this project's laid out, it's not a factor at all. That would be my take on it.
Yeah, and we would require that they have stormwater, and they're going to have to, you know, management of stormwater. They have the 3 acres that are lower, that are floodwater storage areas. So there is an area that is going to help manage the stormwater situation, but the buildings themselves are not in the floodplain.
And we are expecting them to keep those flood storage areas untouched, right? So they're not going to cause any problems for other people by developing that floodplain area and decreasing the storage capacity, as I understand it, right? And then
they're going to have.
We have a. Oh, go ahead, Virginia. Sorry.
They have to remain. You know, we have ANR, we have Agency of Natural Resources, strict rules about floodplain as well as our own, that they have to remain as is. And also, Keith and I this morning we're talking about green infrastructure. You know, how about we have green infrastructure, so there's more absorption of water that's running down, you know, that's not coming up from the floodwater, but from the more intense rain with the water that runs down. There's a hill involved in this property. You know, green infrastructure is what you need to absorb that water. So, I mean, I think that definitely is an area that we need to pay attention to. But the difference between having 31 units and 50 units in that building, which is out of the floodplain, we're not putting more people in harm's way. We're adding them to the system that we have a management provision for, the stormwater. Let's see, Ian.
I think I was just thinking, as far as I know, these guys have been good landlords. Has anybody heard anything to the contrary about that?
They've had a very low vacancy rate. They've had a 1% vacancy rate over the time that building has existed.
Yeah, so it's not always easy to find developers that are good landlords and that are, you know, the building may not be to everybody's liking, the first building, but I find it to be okay and fairly aesthetically pleasing for what it is. And I don't know, I see a lot of the garbage that's getting thrown up in Williston and South Burlington, and I think these guys do a pretty good job. As far as partners go, I think they've been okay. And
yeah,
I wouldn't mind seeing them, you know, do some more work in our town.
Yeah, and it seems like if they can put in building 2 and be held to the, you know, requirement of screening the dumpster, putting in the car charger, the things that they were supposed to, but they sort of, you know, haven't done yet, but making the rest of that vacant lot essentially into a nice housing area with grass, with trees, with sidewalks, those kinds of things. If we hold them to that, then, you know, hopefully they'd go on being good landlords. Lisa.
Yeah, Virginia, I just wanted to, the subject of flooding came up a couple times in the last few minutes, and just want to let you know the select board last night approved the flood mitigation study, which is the first step. By itself, it doesn't do anything, but we will be studying in detail, but we will have help to study mitigating exactly, you know, that floods and just some of the things you addressed, green areas or maybe some grading. You know, I'm not sure how many things could be done, but we've got to take the bull by the horns essentially and do what we can to keep the river not in its banks, but from invading places that really can't stand getting inundated. And the other thing is sound zoning. I think we have adequate rules to protect you know, future development. So with that and the flood mitigation study, I think we'll have a pretty good pair of controls to keep that from being, maybe not from happening, but from at least being catastrophic.
Thank you. So is this what Stephanie Hartsfeld was talking about with the FEMA study, the mitigation?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people have said a lot of things about it, but yes, essentially it's a federal assistance. It's something we can latch onto.
Right,
You know,
to get
existing
help.
experts, and we kind of ride their coattails. So I think it's a good idea, and the board approved it.
Yeah, great. Aaron,
Hi, just a comment as me. I'm still concerned about the increased foot traffic in town and the fact that there is really not a great crosswalk there. It's dark at night and we need a flashing light there. We need to repaint that something. It's not safe and adding more people because it's just going to be, I'm more concerned about more foot traffic and than the cars. Thanks.
okay. Keith, can you talk to that at all?
Yeah, well, we have a couple projects that are going to address that, Aaron. It starts off with Upper Bridge Street and the sidewalk on the east side. Lighting is a part of that design, as is flashers and crosswalks, and pedestrian safety is the focus, period, for the Upper and Lower Bridge Street. So, be patient. That's what I could say to this. This does help to move any potential increase in foot traffic. There is always an unintended circumstance. There are always things that happen. For every reaction, there's an equal and opposite reaction. And I think that is a fantastic way, because I said it, of course, to go about this is to know that there is an equal and opposite reaction to everything. I mean, for the most part, and that's all I got.
Okay. Does anyone else have anything they want to say about density at this point? Do people want us to request of Buttermilk that they make a sketch? I mean, it doesn't have to be engineered, but a plan to show us the variety of units. And if we eliminate the commercial, what would they put in there and how many of each different kind of units there are? Does that seem like something people would like to look at?
Well, I'd be interested to see that.
Yeah, I mean, I would, because what we have wanted is a variety of units so that we can have a few family units and one person, one bedroom, which is a couple possibly, and some of the studios. So it would be nice to see what those increased units, how they would fit into this existing footprint. Chris.
Just in terms of negotiating strategy, I would suggest that we respond to Buttermilk in sort of the way that they have proposed to us. They've given us, a whole range of different scenarios fully fleshed out. They're saying we could do this, we could do this, we could do this. I don't think it makes sense to go back to them and say, hey, we're willing to give up the commercial requirement and we're going to ask a bunch of things of you, but we'd like to see a plan for the layout of the building. I think we should spend the time, come up with the wish list of things that we want to get from them in order to release the commercial requirement, which will include a layout of the building and how the units will be divided between ones of different size, but everything else as well. I think it just muddies the water if we don't do our homework first and know what it is we're going to ask them.
So, Chris, what's on your list?
Well, we already talked about the EV charger and the dumpster.
Right.
I think I would have
and
to
maybe more than one EV charger if we're going to have all those people living there.
Well, that's true. I mean, they've got a fair amount of production going on there. We don't really understand what's happening with the electricity that's coming off of that carport array. I think asking for additional PV generation is an option. I would want to look at that more. Compliance with certainly with the current energy code, but looking in that energy realm, I would like to talk to RCAC a little bit about that.
Mhm.
But I think the short list certainly includes a lot of the stuff that you put down, Virginia. You know, the green space, the walkways, the sidewalk, all of that. Let's put that in there too. Um, yeah, those are the things that were top of mind for me.
Okay. All right. We haven't talked much about parking there, but they will be required to have less parking because of Act 47. They are in the district where there is water and sewer. They will be required to have the minimum parking requirement is going to be 1 space per unit, which will reduce their parking, and also the reduction in the commercial space will reduce their parking requirement because there's much more parking that's required for commercial businesses. So another thing that I was thinking of that we might want is like a picture of the parking. Where are you going to put the parking? How many parking spaces are you think that you're going to need, which we can figure out. I mean, Keith can actually figure that out. What are the amounts that are needed for the commercial space in building 1, and then 1 for each of the units. The other thing that I wanted to talk about in terms of parking is the fact that the Richmond Community Kitchen, which is in the Jolena Court District, their parking in front is going to be taken away by the town to put in the sidewalk that Keith was talking about. There will be no parking in the front. They have 2 parking spaces in the rear of their building where their employees park. I really feel that they need to give up at least 4 parking spaces to the Richmond Community Kitchen. That is an existing building, a commercial enterprise that is working, and they are very alarmed about losing their parking. And, if we want to support commercial, one of the ways to do it is to give them some parking so that whatever business is there, might not be the community kitchen, but whatever business is there is going to need some parking. So that's a question, and also, can we have some public parking there? That's another question. There's going to be more room for parking. I'd like to balance that between the green space and the trees and the sidewalks, and maybe having at least the community kitchen have a few more designated parking spaces. That would be on my list. Anybody else?
Not to pick on the community kitchen, but their front parking is within the town's right of way. A good, I believe, half of it. I don't want to pick on them, to be honest with you, but we do need to ameliorate any issues that they're going to have with parking at some point. And hopefully we can do that through public parking, which I'm a big proponent of. I have some ideas that I could put down on a piece of paper that concerns public parking. So I do have a little bit of experience with it in Lake George. And that obviously is a destination area. Could be a moneymaker for them because there probably would be paid parking. It wouldn't be totally open, but I'm not sure. We have to flesh that out. So I'm just planting that seed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that, might come up if they started to kind of make a drawing of where they would be putting these parking spaces. Yeah, the Richmond Community Kitchen's parking is horrible. It's a terrible place to have parking where you back out onto Bridge Street. So, anything that we can do to get that parking in back of their building would be important. Anybody else? I mean, what I'm thinking of is for our next meeting is to put some of these ideas down as a counter proposal and see what it is that we need from them to help us understand these ideas and see how you all feel about it. I mean, I do feel that we've made some progress today, and I would like to go on making progress so this doesn't take us, take up our whole schedule, because we have a bunch of other things that we need to do as well. Any other comments people want to make about that? Does that seem acceptable? Yes, no? Anybody have any other ideas? I agree with Chris that we should have a whole packet. This is what we feel is going to be best for the town of Richmond. So we like the idea of more housing. We understand about the commercial. What's it going to look like? What amenities can you put in that's going to make it a nice neighborhood? And if they want to apply for an NDA, which is a neighborhood development area, which allows them to have reduced fees at Act 250, would we support it? I would say yes, if we get these amenities that make it feel like a nice neighborhood and not a warehouse of people. They wanted Revy to do that work, which he was doing. I think they should do the work. The town would have to support it, but it could be a neighborhood development area. So it meets a lot of the criteria for that. All right, so if no one else has any comments about this, we'll proceed that way for our next meeting. We'll mock something up in the way of a draft. If anybody wants to submit any information, like any energy standards, you know, they claim they want to be a zero energy building. That's a good thing too. They want their buildings to be zero fossil fuel energy. So, hello?
I got her muted. We're good.
Okay. So, you know, any ideas like that you might have, if you could send them to Keith, that would be great. I think that's a good goal to be thinking about. And I think this is a good time to revisit this. You know, we thought about some of these things in the original zoning that we couldn't really make happen, but now I think maybe we'll be able to make progress with them. All right, so we're going to move on just briefly to just update people where we are in the other projects. It's on the agenda to just touch base. The village residential neighborhoods, we need to finish those. We need to get Act 47 into the village residential neighborhoods. Yeah, bye, Connie. There are not that many things that are outstanding that we need to talk about with the village residential neighborhoods. So I'm hoping that at our next meeting, maybe we can have those drafts to look at again. We're looking at so we have to reduce the minimum lot size to 0.2 acres. So we're looking at things like lot coverage, lot frontage, setbacks. Are they suitable for 5 units per acre, which Act 47 requires us to put in these neighborhoods? So that's what we're doing there. Hopefully we'll have drafts on those 2 village neighborhoods and get Act 47 into at least those districts. The second thing that we will be thinking about is the master development plan and the subdivision regulations. So right now, subdivision regulations still control the master development plan, part of a PUD. We would like to have a discussion about revising the subdivision regulations to remove it and to replace it with the critical permit standards and also with standards, natural resource standards that will be in the zoning that will exert control over, you know, not the minutia of the permitting process, but actually what happens to our open land. We need to have this conversation. That's a long conversation. And I'm working with the Conservation Commission to try to flesh out what those standards could be and what the data upon which they're based is. So, you know, we have a floodplain, for instance, in our zoning regulations. We have an extensive floodplain section. That's data. That's something the DRB can say it is or it isn't, you know, and that's what they need to think about a lot of these things. We don't have anything for forest land, for farmland. We need to be thinking about what standards we have for those things. So at some point we can look at the revision of the subdivision regulations that we've tentatively made, and we can start having this conversation about the natural resource standards. The other thing that is kind of off our plate is what is happening with the industrial, commercial, residential, and the PUD. That stuff we approved is all ready to go to the select board. The full red line of the zoning that includes that is in there. And the only thing we're waiting on now is the town attorney comments, and he's been away or something. I don't know. He's been busy. So as soon as that lands on Keith's desk and there's nothing in there, we're going to send that whole package, the PUD revisions, the IC residential, the bylaw report, the clean copy, the full red line over to the select board. The whole shebang, we will call that the whole shebang, will go to the select board to get on their public process agenda. I have written an extensive memo about what we did and why we did it. So we'll keep you posted when that is put on the agenda. And then, other things that we need to do is we need to get Act 47 into the other village districts. The RC districts are pretty good because we saw it coming and got most things in there, but there are a few changes that need to be made. The village downtown, Jolena Court, we're sort of working on right now. The village commercial district, those will also have to have the Act 47 changes. So that's down the road. Any comments? Anybody want to talk about anything else? All right, great. Well, I think we've had a promising conversation, and we'll work up some more materials for next time. And I think we're good to entertain Chris's motion.
I would like to move that we adjourn.
All right. And a second?
A second?
So we had Adam and somebody else made a second.
It was me.
Okay. Joy. Okay. Great. Is anybody opposed to adjourning the meeting at this time? Hearing from no one, I will say that the meeting is adjourned. Thank you all for coming, and we'll see you all next time.
Good night. Thanks, Virginia.
Yeah, you're welcome. Send any comments to Keith that you might have, anything you think about, any thoughts you might have of what will be persuasive. I mean, we're going to have to be persuasive to the select board, so we'll want to be behind the proposal that we make and have good arguments.
Watch that 60 minutes. Watch the 60 minutes story if you get a chance.